The first time I saw her was on the 143 bus to Westbrook. She sat at the back, hunched over a sketchbook, drawing furiously with a worn-down pencil. I wouldn't have noticed her at all if not for the angle of her head, tilted slightly to the left, as if listening to something just over her shoulder. I caught glimpses of her drawings as passengers shifted between us. Corners. She was obsessed with corners. Not just any corners, the specific places where walls meet ceiling meets wall. The neglected spaces and rooms that collect cobwebs and shadows. The bus jolted, and her pencil skittered across the page. She looked up directly at me, and I quickly averted my eyes. Too late. In my peripheral vision, I saw her close her sketchbook and stand. The next stop was mine anyway. I hurried off the bus, the cold November air biting at my face. Footsteps followed close behind. I picked up my pace, turned onto my street, fumbled with my keys at the front door of my apartment building. "You saw them too, didn't you?" Her voice was soft but certain. I turned to find her standing there, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, that same slight tilt to her head. "Saw what?" I asked. "The things that live in the corners." "My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm an accountant with an unremarkable life and a studio apartment that I keep meticulously clean. Or at least, I was unremarkable until I met Eliza Ward. After our encounter on my doorstep, I invited her in for coffee. I'm still not sure why. Something in her eyes, a familiar desperation, perhaps, made it impossible to turn her away. "They're getting bolder," she said, spreading her sketches across my kitchen table. "They used to stay hidden, but now they're stretching out, testing boundaries." The drawings were disturbing in their precision. Corners of rooms, each with subtle distortions, shadows that bent at impossible angles, textures that seemed to pulse on the page. In some, if you look from just the right perspective, you could almost make out faces. "What exactly do you think these are?" I asked carefully. "Not think. No." She tapped one drawing with a bitten fingernail. "They've always been there, in the spaces we ignore. The corners between dimensions. Most people's brains filter them out. But once you truly see them, they notice you back." I should have shown her the door then. Instead, I found myself saying, "The past few weeks I've been having dreams." About corners. Eliza's face lit up. "Tell me." The dreams had started 3 weeks earlier. I would find myself awake, or believing I was awake, staring at the corner of my bedroom where the walls met the ceiling. As I watched, the corner would seem to deepen, as if the walls were extending beyond their physical boundaries, creating an impossible space. And in that space, something moved that I told Eliza all of this, watching her nod with increasing excitement. "They're thinning the membrane," she whispered, "finding weak spots to push through." "What are they?" I asked again. "I don't know what they call themselves, but they're hungry." She looked around my apartment, her gaze lingering on each corner. "Your place is perfect, so many right angles, so precisely maintained. They love mathematical perfection." I laughed nervously. "So, I should make my apartment messy, eh?" "It wouldn't help now. They've already noticed you." That night, after Eliza left, I couldn't stop looking at the corners of my apartment. Had that one always been so sharp? Was that shadow always there, clinging to the ceiling joint above my bed? I tried to distract myself with television, but my eyes kept drifting upward. Around midnight, exhausted but wired, I finally turned off all the lights and forced myself to lie down. The dream came immediately. The corner above my bed deepened, darkened. But this time, something emerged, a thin, jointed appendage like an insect leg, but wrong somehow, moving with deliberate intelligence that I tried to scream but couldn't. Tried to move but was paralyzed. The appendage extended, reaching toward me with terrible slowness. Then my alarm blared, and I jerked awake, gasping that MY phone showed a text from Eliza. "Did they visit you?" "We met at a coffee shop." Eliza looked worse than the day before. Hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes, the tilt to her head more pronounced. "They're in my apartment now," she said without preamble. "Not just in the corners anymore. They're stretching out, claiming more space. Have you tried staying somewhere else?" I asked. "They follow me, and it's worse in hotels. All those identical rooms, all those perfect corners." She clutched her coffee with trembling hands. I've been researching. There are accounts throughout history, people who saw things in the corners of rooms. Most were diagnosed with various mental illnesses. Maybe that's what this is, I suggested gently. Maybe we should talk to someone. Eliza's laugh was brittle. I did. 3 different therapists. Medication didn't help. Nothing helps except understanding what they want. And what's that? Space. Our space. They want to exist here, and they need hosts to anchor themselves. I felt cold despite the coffee shop's warmth. Hosts. She rolled up her sleeve. Along her forearm were strange markings. Not quite bruises, not quite burns. In perfect right angles. They're mapping me, she whispered, creating corners on my body. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a hotel, requesting a room with character. Something old, with sloping floors and rounded corners. The clerk gave me a strange look, but assigned me to the attic suite of the converted Victorian mansion. The room was perfect. All sloped ceilings and curved walls where the roof dictated the architecture. I relaxed for the first time in days, until I noticed the wardrobe in the corner. I could see was an antique piece, tall and imposing, and where it met the sloped ceiling and curved wall, it created a small, sharp corner, the only true right angle in the room that I should have requested another room. Instead, I convinced myself to be rational. I covered the corner with my jacket and went to bed. The dream was different this time. I was inside the corner, looking out. My perspective was fractured, multiplied. I could see the room from various impossible angles simultaneously. And I could see myself, sleeping on the bed that I watched as something emerged from the corner where the wardrobe met the wall. Not an appendage this time, but a ripple in reality itself, spreading outward like a stained IT flowed toward my sleeping body, and as it touched my arm, I felt it in my dream state, a cold, burning sensation. I tried to warn myself to wake my sleeping form, but I was trapped in this fractured perspective. The ripple covered my sleeping arm, then began to trace patterns on it, perfect right angles, mathematical precision that I woke with a scream, clutching my arm. In the dim light, I could make out faint markings, identical to those I'd seen on Eliza's arm that we met in a park the next day. No corners, no right angles, just the curved paths and organic shapes of nature that Eliza's condition had deteriorated further. The markings had spread up her neck, and her head tilt was now a constant, severe angle, as if she were perpetually listening to something just behind her. "They're preparing us," she said, voice hoarse, "creating spaces in us that correspond to their dimensions." I showed her my arm. The markings had darkened overnight. "How do we stop this?" I asked. "We don't, but I've figured out what they want." Her eyes shone with feverish intensity. "They need our perception. They can only fully enter our reality when we acknowledge them, when we look directly at them instead of filtering them out. So we just don't look at them. Too late for that. But we can give them something else to look at instead." She reached in her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this. It's full of perfect corners, a maze of right angles. A puzzle box for them." She placed it on the bench between us. It was beautiful in its complexity. Surfaces within surfaces, corners leading to more corners. If they want mathematical perfection, let them have it, but contained on our terms. That night, I placed the box in the corner of my hotel room where the wardrobe met the wall. I sat on the bed, watching, waiting. Hours passed. My eyelids grew heavy, but I fought sleep. I had to see what would happen. Around 3 a.m., the corner deepened. The familiar ripple appeared, flowing outward. But this time, instead of moving toward me, it hesitated, then redirected toward the box that I held my breath as the ripple surrounded the wooden puzzle, exploring its many corners and angles. The box began to change, its dimensions shifting subtly, corners multiplying beyond what should have been physically possible. The ripple was absorbed into the box, drawn into its impossible geometry. For a moment, everything was still. Then the box began to fold in on itself, corners collapsing into corners, until it simply vanished. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "Is it done?" "I think so," I replied. The box disappeared. "Good. They're contained now. Not gone, but redirected. Focused on the puzzle rather than on us." I looked at my arm. The markings were already fading. 3 months have passed. My life has largely returned to normal. The dreams have stopped. The markings have disappeared. Eliza and I meet occasionally, never in places with too many right angles. She still tilts her head sometimes, especially when tired, but the desperate intensity in her eyes has dimmed. We don't talk about what happened, about what might still be happening in spaces we can't perceive. But sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I catch myself avoiding looking directly at the corners. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I think I hear something, a subtle clicking like the sound of a wooden puzzle box, endlessly reconfiguring itself. They're still there, in the corners between dimensions, working on Eliza's puzzle. I just hope it keeps them occupied for a very, very long time. Because occasionally, I wake with a start in the middle of the night, and for just a moment before my brain filters it out, I see new corners forming where none existed before.